Want to expand the reach of your content? Start a podcast. Feature industry experts on your show and leverage the influence and reach of your guests to grow your brand. Learn more at sweetfishmedia.com.
You're listening to B2B Growth, a daily podcast for B2B leaders. We've interviewed names you've probably heard before, like Gary Vaynerchuk and Simon Sinek, but you've probably never heard from the majority of our guests. That's because the bulk of our interviews aren't with professional speakers and authors. Most of our guests are in the trenches leading sales and marketing teams. They're implementing strategy. They're experimenting with tactics. They're building the fastest growing B2B companies in the world. My name is James Carberry. I'm the founder of Sweetfish Media, a podcast agency for B2B brands, and I'm also one of the co-hosts of this show. When we're not interviewing sales and marketing leaders, you'll hear stories from behind the scenes of our own business. We'll share the ups and downs of our journey as we attempt to take over the world. Just kidding. Well, maybe. Let's get into the show.
Welcome back to B2B Growth. I am your host for today's episode, Nikki Ivy with Sweetfish Media. Guys, I've got with me today Ed Breault, who is Chief Marketing Officer at Aprimo. Ed, how you doing today?
I'm doing fantastic. How are you, Nikki?
I'm well. The sun is shining out here in Florida, which I know you talked about offline here, having some R&R down here yourself, maybe getting a little bit too much sun. But yeah, I'm doing good. I'm excited to talk to you about the topic we've got laid out today. So guys, we're going to be talking about Aprimo's model, their model for navigating the dark funnel and sort of a framework that they've come up with that is it's really interesting. He said that they're not really putting it out there. So there haven't been a lot of talk about it, but you guys are going to get the inside scoop from the man himself. But before we get into all of that, Ed, I would love it if you would just give us a little bit of background on yourself and what you and the folks at Aprimo have been up to these days.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Nikki. So yes, as you said, Chief Marketing Officer at Aprimo. Aprimo is now, after 3 years of having brought this brand back, which was completely taken out of the market about 7 or so years ago, now established market leadership in three major product categories: digital asset management for customer experience. We reinvigorated and brought back what's called marketing resource management, of which we're a clear leader according to analysts, and also through channel marketing automation, which is like that last mile of content and experiences 2, through, and 4 channels if you're in a B2B reseller model. So I've been with Aprimo for about 14 years. And before that, I had careers in nuclear energy things and doing a lot of really geeky things with data models and doing big data before we called it that, pulling all kinds of data out of nuclear power plants and building really cool visualizations and building predictive models for when nuclear power plants would fail. And then, man, I just got so tired of that I threw myself into my next cool experience, which was business model transformation with large organizations, just redesigning them from the ground up on how they'd operate. And then as I was doing that, this thing called marketing really piqued my interest. And I just fell in love with marketing ever since and all the things that go into it. And yeah, so I've been with Aprimo through our formative years and rapid growth years. And then most recently, our relaunch of the company and brand back into market.
I think that's incredible. I mean, most companies a lot of companies. I mean, I came here. I'm here in Florida. You and I talked about before, but I spent a lot of time in Austin, Texas, where there's a lot of startups. And a lot of folks don't get out of the startup phase. So to start up and then restart up and then do so successfully, not easy. So congrats on that. Welcome back, might I add. But I want folks to hear about this content experience model that you guys are applying to what you do. You call it ARP squared. And so it endeavors to be adaptive, responsive, predictive, and prescriptive. Give us a little overview of that framework in general, and then we'll just hit each one of these one at a time.
Absolutely. And apologies in advance for using a lot of buzzwords in the building of the model, but we realized they were the right words to keep us laser focused on building progressive layers of our organization and specifically marketing from the inside out to then relaunch the company, get the brand back out there. We rebuilt the product and then moved to a completely brand new company. So we were not born in the cloud. We were reborn in the cloud is what I like to say. So about 3 years ago, we were given the opportunity to get Aprimo back out in the market. So I had the chance with my team to say, wow, what an opportunity to redo this thing in a way built for the future, make it future proof, and have it do all the things, having learned from the last 12 years of becoming a rapid growth software company, what we would do now different. And what we realized is if we were going to do this right, we had to become extremely adaptive from the ground up. So that's where we wanted to start. So what does adaptive mean? Well, we realized that the market's different. There's all these macro changes that are happening in the world and that influence business, that influence buyer expectations. Then we also realized the customer expectations in B2B were completely being disrupted by B2B experiences, direct-to-consumer experiences. So think about how we buy today just as consumers. You can buy your products direct and you can have them highly personalized, tailored. I can buy a pair of Vans shoes right now with my brand on them. I can design my own pair of Vans old school shoes that has my brand, my special colors, that is created in China, direct shipped to me. And think about that, all the personalization that goes into that, the personalization of the supply chain. Also, what we all know now, things like Uber, where we click buttons and we now have ride sharing. We don't really want to own anymore. Don't make us buy, let us try is really what is coming out. And we're expecting that now in B2B. Also, economic climate and market trends continuously will change. And so we realized we had to build a future-proof organization from the ground up, from the mindset to the operations, to the processes, to the technology selection that's going to run our business. Knowing that all these things would change, how do we design that from the ground up? And one of the things we landed on in this adaptive level 1 is what we call it, is having a full content operating model that looks at the complete life cycle of content from ideation through how that content is fully delivered, and then making sure that we aligned our content life cycle to our customer buying journey. And we don't think about it as B2B or B2C or D2C anymore. It's B2P, business to people. And that is really that foundational layer, starting off creating an adaptive organization.
I love it. I always like I know you said that, the words sounded buzzy, but I think you were right in that they're the right words, and that's what's got to matter here. So I don't mind you coining the phrase B2P on this episode, on this show. I don't mind that at all on this podcast, because I think that a lot of folks are talking about that very thing. And so once you've gotten through that stage where you painted for us, like you laid out so well here, where you realize here's what's happening, how do we, make ourselves ready or fit into what's happening, that adaptive phase. Then comes step 2, which is to be responsive. Tell me what you mean when you say that.
Yeah, definitely responsive. And so responsive, we looked at a couple of ways to think about this. Reactive is not the right word. What we realized is if we want to become a responsive organization, you can't just jump to responsive. You have to have solved that adaptive piece first, because responsive without adaptive is just ad hoc. Right. And when you're ad hoc and you're running an ad hoc machine, you are and I'm, head of and chief marketing officer. I don't want to have the ad hoc marketing organization that is just set up to fail. So we had to get the adaptive layer figured out. Now, responsive, what is that? Now, that is really capitalizing on available opportunity in the market. It's things like having agile operations and agile mindset, having agility in the organization. So we actually looked at some of the agile methodologies, Scrum, Kanban, Scrumban, right. And we looked at what the right level was for us. So we did not take one of the agile methodologies off the shelf and plug it in. Just didn't work. So we took a very mixed approach with some of the different agile methodologies, and we definitely use Kanban on top of a set of repeatable processes. And what we have now is the ability to respond to things like competitive threats, to market opportunity, and we've got completely operational playbooks in place, so we know what to do. We are prepared. It's like the ultimate level of preparedness to respond to opportunities, because time kills deals is one of the things I like to say. Mm-hmm. And also this concept of rolling planning. So while we have an agile operating model, we also have agile strategic planning, where we do people-based planning. We put our personas at the center of how we plan on an annual basis, a long-term perspective, quarterly, monthly, and then even weekly. So we have these rolling planning cadences, because you just can't predict the future, is what we found out. So we have to be able to, based on what we're seeing in the market, what these changes are, have those iterative cycles into our operating model that we can then pivot throughout the year. So that's level 2 responsive.
Right. And so I see how it sort of, the one builds on the other. So you've adapted to the existing environment that you're coming into. You've figured out what it is you need to do to respond to that environment, to move things forward. And now based on those experiences, you're able to be predictive about what your approach is next. So talk a little bit about what you guys learned, what organizations tend to learn when they get to that predictive step.
Yes, predictive is where we are now. So I want to say in year 1 of bringing Aprimo, the brand, back, it was very focused around adaptive. Year 2 was around responsive. And now we are thriving in predictive. And these are capabilities that didn't exist 2 years ago. So these are things like first and third party demand signals, leveraging artificial intelligence and intent modeling. And so what that means is you can actually have models run where it's listening to what we use a lot of, some of the serious decisions methodologies. Demand units is what they're called, which is you've got these demand units out there in the market. They could be at one account, but one account could have multiple demand units. And what we're doing is we are listening to the market for these signals which say there is demand which is just starting to form. And then what that does do, it looks at branded keywords, it looks at generic keywords. So I can know for a demand unit what their pain is. They could be searching for like content marketing solutions or digital asset management solutions, or how do I improve my customer experience? So long tail search string. So now that we're listening, what's building in the model is an intent score. So we're able to see in what we call the dark funnel, this in-market activity. So now we no longer, well, we definitely still look at the total addressable market, but what's more meaningful within the signals within the market are within this dark funnel is the total addressable in market, or the TAM. TIIM is our new KPI for what we like to also call the economics of winning, right? Because you're putting all your resources now at the most winnable opportunities, delivering. And my charter, part of my charter, and I also command my team, is to be extremely helpful. That is our number one goal, is to be helpful, help organizations understand their challenges, create great content, go and meet them in the dark funnel, and be prepared. And doing so requires you to be able to interpret this intent versus interest in the market. Also comparing this first party and third party demand. So third party is data that's aggregated from third party data sources out on the internet on various digital properties. Now you have your highly valuable first party demand signals where there's intent. So looking at key intent places on your website, your contact us pages. We use conversational marketing on our website to look at how we can close the gap in time on meeting needs. And so you pull all this data together. Now you're able to have this very predictive model in place. So you're completely prepared now. You're responsive. You're predictive. You can literally see in the dark funnel, and we can calculate on a specific account when we'll potentially be receiving an RFP from them, or when they'll potentially be coming inbound. So we are not only fishing with nets from an inbound standpoint, but now we're fishing with spears. We're going out and meeting them in the dark funnel to pull those opportunities to us, being as helpful as possible along the way.
Yeah, like leaving nothing on the table. This is incredible. I'm glad you came and laid this out for us. I think that's one of my favorite parts of it is talking about. We do talk a lot about on this show and in my network, right, about the knowing your total addressable market and then how to leverage that. But taking that a step further with that total addressable in market piece, I'm really glad that you gave us that. I know there's a lot of folks listening that will find that valuable. And I love that you guys are thriving in this predictive phase. It sounds like I said, because we took this sort of measured approach, like progressive approach.
It just makes sense to be measuring with the KPIs that you guys have outlined, that you guys have sort of defined. And the next one, the next frontier of that, the next step in this model is to be prescriptive. Tell us what that looks like.
Yes. Yeah. What it is something you need to leverage technology in kind of the bleeding edge way. And we're doing that. We are almost there is what I like to say. It's proving itself out in small cases, but think about it like this. The Spotify effect. I use Spotify, and as an example, we now have these one-to-one model experiences that are expected. So if I get out my iPhone and look at my Spotify account, and Nikki, if you get out your iPhone and look at your Spotify, each of ours will look completely different,
right?
Because it knows about us. It creates these made-for-you moments, and it's using technology to all of it. I don't want to say it's completely removed the human element, but it's become extremely programmatic in creating these recommendations. So it's leveraging the lookalike model plays where it knows what's been done before. It knows where you, the brand, where in our case, where Aprimo is successful within a specific industry, whether that's financial services or retail, CPG, high tech, life sciences, brand manufacturing, some of our key industries. It knows where we've won before, where we've delivered extremely helpful experiences, taking predictive intent data and the content experience. It now has these enriched account data sets, and it's at this level of creating scaled personalization. So I think now, more than ever, with some of the amazing technology that's out there for B2B marketers, things like account-based marketing have completely changed forever. And we are just pushing the limits of what these technologies can do, and we're getting smarter, and we're hitting the pause button, and we're looking at what's working. We're doing our retrospectives, and all while the technology is improving, getting us to this future state prescriptive capability that's really helping us create customers much faster in a much more economical way.
Man, what an exciting time. You mentioned at the top of this, when you talked about your background and your experience and how you came into this thing, how this thing called marketing just sort of got a hold of you. Listen, I'm not a marketer. Most of my experience is in sales in these startup streets out here on B2B. But this is so exciting. This approach, I think, would make people, especially within the organization, I'm sure, make it much easier to feel included and bought into you guys' overall mission. And for those marketers listening, I just don't think there's any doubt that folks are gonna, buy into this and catch on to this pretty quickly. So thank you for laying that out for us the way that you did, Ed. And now that I have successfully picked your brain and seen what I could get out of it, it's time for you to tell us what you are putting in it. So talk about a learning resource that you have engaged with here recently, or one that you maybe just kind of go back to from time to time that's got you excited or is informing your approach these days.
Yeah, definitely. And it's the latter of what you said. A book that I just recently went back to, that it's been around for a while, but it's a methodology that I really think has evolved in its interpretation based on the kinds of technology we have today, is what's called a challenger sale. So it's definitely a business book.
Right.
It is a methodology to approach B2B selling. And what it does is it's amazingly challenging for a brand, for sales and marketing, because you have to be really intelligent. You have to know the market. You have to know the industry. You have to know your value proposition to the pain point out there because you take them through a storytelling choreography of reframing the market and reframing the mindset and the problem. And so what I've done recently is I went back to that book. I read that book after having read it several years ago. I think the first time I read it was when it first came out. So Challenger Inc. put this book out. And why I went back to this book is because when I brought Aprimo back into the market, it's amazingly competitive. And I needed a way to break through. I needed a way to break through the hyper competition, the 7,000 plus pieces of MarTech tools out there. But how do you stand out? And I went back to that and I put a new spin, a new interpretation on it. And I'm making a lot of the concepts in it highly programmatic. So now I've got sales and marketing working together. I've got the technology and the content working together. And that's really been working for us. And I'll call it the secret/unsecret sauce of what I'm doing right now.
I love it. That book is actually, it's in my Audible library. I have not gotten to it yet, but you've put a fire under me with that one for sure. And I just have to say, God, I love the way you talk about what you do. It is so, refreshing and such a privilege for me to get to talk to people who are as passionate about what they do as you are. And it's good for the listeners too. So thank you so much for that. I know folks just like me have become fast fans of yours, Ed. Let us know how people can connect with you.
Absolutely. I encourage anyone who's interested, reach out on Twitter. It's at Ed Breault, so at EDBREAULT. Also, Ed Breault on LinkedIn. Those are my two primary channels. And happy to answer any questions, follow up on any of these concepts, and have more conversations.
Sweet. Thank you so much, Ed. We'll have to have you back on once you guys have pushed through this thriving stage that you're at right now with the predictive and get some more insights from you on what you found and what you learned from the prescriptive stage of that ARP3 content experience model. Thanks again for being on the show.
You bet. Thank you so much, Nikki.
We totally get it. We publish a ton of content on this podcast, and it can be a lot to keep up with. That's why we've started the B2B Growth Big Three, a no-fluff email that boils down our 3 biggest takeaways from an entire week of episodes. Sign up today at sweetfishmedia.com/big3. That's sweetfishmedia.com/big3.